Welcome to part 2 of my interview with Dyane Carrere. In part 1, Dyane and I discuss what it means to have stress in your life and how we deal with stress, especially for our children and youth. And she prepares us for a conversation around ways that we can teach children and youth how to better regulate when they are feeling anxious or stressed due to various reasons, and in particular right now, the uncertainty that is accompanied the COVID-19 pandemic. So Dyane, I really appreciate you explaining the 2 rails of this reset process, but I do understand that there's a 4-step process within the regulation piece.
Mm-hmm.
So would you mind defining what those 4 steps are, and then we can get into some details about each one.
Okay, so the core 4 steps, and there are a couple other things we can talk about, particularly for the school setting. But when we think about right now in our homes and thinking about moving into school, even as like a class-wide practice, I want to focus on these 4 core steps. The first is really about gross motor, large physical movement, and it's guided. If you have an adult guiding this child, what we're doing is we are taking them through a series of physical movements that are calming for the body. So it's gross motor. Lots of times when we think, oh, we're stressed out, let's get a stress ball, right? But what burns off the stress chemicals, the adrenaline that's in your body and the cortisol in your brain, is big gross motor, large motor movement. So it would be things like maybe jumping jacks, maybe wall push-ups, lifting some kettlebells, some things that burn off the stress chemical, but also introduce some calming chemicals. So occupational therapists have taught us that deep pressure into our shoulder joints and our hip joints releases dopamine, which is calming. So when we do wall push-ups, we're getting that deep pressure. So we're introducing chemicals that help us return to a more focused state, and we're taking away chemicals that keep us from being focused. And we do it in a very efficient and effective method. So using small sensory kinds of things may eventually calm us down, but we want to be quick about it if we can. So doing those activities, I like to see adults doing them with a student or with a child if they wish, or an adolescent if they wish. I found most teenagers do not want to be having an adult standing there watching them, right? So if we do it together, and I think a bonus of doing these things together every step is that with that, doing it together, we're also regulating our own systems and burning off our own stress. So as we do it with a child, it makes more sense.
So step 1 is gross motor.
Gross motor.
And that's those big movements.
Yeah. It's move your body. Yeah. Now, I think an important thing when we think about that, and there are some nuances to this, but a really important thing is that we don't just do like a dance party, because we want movement that has pattern to it. Pattern calms the brain. So when we do things like jumping jacks to a count, that's a pattern. And that actually causes your brain to be calmer. So we want to think about movements that introduce that deep pressure if possible. We want to think about movements that have pattern and repetition to them. It's why rocking, when we think about rocking, that's a pattern. A really good way to think about it is think what you would do with an infant. If you were trying to calm an infant down, you wouldn't move erratically, right? You'd do it in a very patterned way. You'd pat them in a patterned way. Pattern is really important. It settles the neurological system. Step 2.
Can I ask you, would walking be considered a good gross motor activity?
Yes. Walking is a wonderful, so going for a walk. If you can go for a walk outside, you get the bonus of the fresh air and all of those kinds of things. You're also getting more oxygen to your brain, which is a good thing. You can think more clearly. So walking is excellent. A lot of people ask about running. The problem with, and depending if you have a child who's on the track team, then going out for a run can be really effective. With young kids, running tends to not be patterned. It's like the jump around, dance around. And when we jump around and dance around, if we're already feeling stressed, it can actually make us more, I guess, less focused and more hyper. So we want to do things like walk, because those help us to settle the whole system down, our whole system down.
That's really interesting. That nuance about the pattern, I wasn't aware of. And I did think that just turning on the music and having a dance party, because that does make me feel better, but I could see where it could make you more disorganized, so to speak.
And if your child likes that, you could start with a dance party, but then bring down to a pattern. So if they're more likely to engage with you with a dance party, maybe you could start there, but then bring them into that pattern, because you're taking them from big unstructured activity down into big structured activity. Right. So you can meet them kind of at that they're interested level. But if we stay there very long, we're actually we'll have a harder time settling them back down. So think about the things that they enjoy and engage them in this conversation. Of course, the best time is when you're not stressed out, is engage them in the activity of these options. And we listed some in the PDF. Of these options, what are you interested in? And get them to have some choice in that. That's also the relationship side of step one, is we're doing it with them. We're joining kind of the parallel play of early childhood, right? We're joining with them. And we're also giving them some choice. And we're also honoring the fact that their body is on go, rather than if they typically think about the old-fashioned timeout, you're supposed to go and sit. Right. Their body is primed chemically to be moving. And so when we say, I can tell your body is really needing to move a lot, let's try this. It's a much better match for them of where they are then, and then we can guide them into that more settled state.
That's really interesting. One thing I've been noticing a lot on social media is TikTok. Are you familiar with TikTok?
Yes. Yep.
And there's certain songs that a lot of people are doing, and they have dance routines to them. And that's a very engaging, now you can't get a teenager to do it, but your 8, 9, 10-year-old with some of those dances, I could see that as one of those regulating type of activities, and it's fun.
Yeah, it's a great idea, and you can do it, and it has predictability. If you do the same one over and over, right, you might be bored to tears, but that predictability is actually one of the things we crave when we're super stressed, is predictability, which is why COVID's so hard, because it's all about life is completely unpredictable right now. Right. And so the more we can introduce that predictability, so if they have 3 or 4 of those TikTok things that have a dance movement that's more prescribed, let them choose from those, and that enhances predictability as well.
Wow, that's great. Okay, wonderful. So now that's step one, and I see how you integrated that relationship piece.
Yes.
How about step 2?
Okay, so step 2 is now moving from big gross motor activity to a more focused fine motor or sensory focus. So now we're moving into settling our breathing, for example. We might do something like, if you were doing big arm circles, now you might do them smaller and more controlled and slower, bring it down and try to just make finger circles with your arms extended. You're doing things that are kind of bringing the system down and allowing it to more focus. So we're shifting to fine motor. This is where some people have been doing coloring. Or so I might sit with you and we'll color together. And when I'm talking about these times, we're talking about 2 minutes per. It's not a long amount of time, and you can figure that out within your own household, what makes sense for your child. In school, we tend to need, because we need the child to get back to the learning activity, we tend to look at those time frames, and they're fairly tight. As long as we're accomplishing the goal of regulation, we're gonna tighten those up to about 2 minutes. But if it takes, if it's 10 minutes with your child, and it's an activity where you are bonding with them, you're looking back and forth, you're sharing the materials, that's building that relationship. We're no longer playing tug of war, we're in this together, we're doing it. We can now introduce a little bit of conversation, and we're doing fine motor, or we might do something as simple as a 3-2-1 strategy, where we try to sit and what are 3 things we see? What are 3 things we hear? What are 3 things we can touch? And then 2, and then 1. And by focusing on the senses, it tends to regulate our breathing. And when we regulate our breathing, our body settles down. And then we can also do deliberate breathing exercises. And a big hint with that is lots of times we say, take a deep breath, right? Take a deep breath. And kids will draw in a really large breath. That is actually activating for your system. It revs your system up. Think about if you've ever been startled, what does your breath do naturally, right? It's preparing you to take off. So what we want to emphasize is the long breath out, the long, slow breath out. So breathe in through your nose, breathe out through your mouth, nice and long. And that actually calms the system. So think about when you get to the end of the day or you finish a task, we do a, that's telling the systems that everything's okay. And so when we focus on breathing, we want to do that with our children. And there's, for younger children, Sesame Street has 2 wonderful videos. If you type in belly breathing and Sesame Street, there's 2, one with, I think, Rosita and one with Elmo. And so we can use those for younger children. For older children, there are a lot of sports videos that talk about the importance of breathing. So we can talk about that, or we can borrow from their own experience. When you're getting ready to do something, what's a way that you breathe that calms you, and encouraging them and doing that with them. Right. And it just settles your entire system. It gets oxygen to your brain. And there's also, as we do these things with a child or a young person, when we're doing it, if we're doing it with them, that actually signals our brain that we are connected. There's something called synchronicity as we move together, and that's why people tend to bond if they're, on a cheer team together, or they tend to bond if they're in the military. We have synchronous movement. It helps us. We see someone who's doing what we're doing. They're mirroring us, and it helps us with connection. So if you're feeling fragmented with your child at home, that reconnecting is an important thing. So moving with them, coloring with them, breathing with them are all things that are saying at a very subliminal level, we're in this together. We're here for each other. We know each other. We sense each other. We're co-regulating.
Wow, there's so much information in all these experiences you're giving. So we've gone from gross motor to small motor, right?
Right, and senses, yeah.
Now we're going into step 3.
Okay, and step 3 is when we start tuning back in to thinking. So we've settled our physical being, and now we're ready to start bringing that thinking brain back online. But we want to do it in a way that isn't too abrupt. So this is where we might just do a fun thinking activity. We might do something like categories. So I say to you, Tina, let's do animals, go. And you would say?
Cat.
And I'd say dog, and we go back and forth. We're not very creative, are we? We would go back and forth, and so, or saying the ABCs with a younger child, or counting by 2s, or naming family members. They're simple, they should be activities that are very easy for the individual, because we don't want them stressing out again, and they're kind of fun, and they also have this, this call and respond kind of feeling. We're going back and forth, known in the world of attachment as serve and return. So we are sending something out, they're doing something back with us, another kind of enhancement of relationship. And usually when we're doing things like naming categories, we're smiling. We're doing a lot of things that are increasing the dopamine, and we're bonding as we do that. So it's warming up the brain, if you will. It's warming up the engine of the brain to think. And that's step 3.
Wow, that's wonderful. And it's funny that I did pick cat because I'm slightly stressed doing this interview. And so that's about all my brain could bring to the forefront.
That's so true for all of us. When our brains are stressed, there's some things that happen that are really simple to remember. And when we start becoming self-aware, and we can help our children become self-aware of this, several things happen. As stress chemicals build in our brain, we become less auditory and language oriented, and we become more visually oriented. So that's why we don't want to talk as much through this process, but participate with. Our bodies are on go. They're just ready to go. And we, our eyesight actually improves, which is kind of interesting. You tend to dilate under a lot of stress. And so you're primed for being able to watch somebody else, but not primed for being able to listen to them. And our thinking goes down and our emotions go up.
Wow.
And so we're using the strength of the brain, even in that state, which is the visual, in this process.
That's interesting.
Okay.
And
So then
now we're into, is it safe to say the final step of this?
The final step of the core process, and that can take a couple different forms. If you just have noticed that the child or young person is dysregulated, but no problem has occurred, really step 4 is just about getting back to it. So it's like, where were we? What were we doing? Or, let me help you, or come on over, let's do this. It's about getting back to work, if you will, whatever that is. Working, it might be, it's just now playing with your sibling, right? So for most of us in our home setting, that's what we're gonna do at step 4, is just help that transition back. And it might be just a sentence. It might be check in on how you're feeling. And then we'll, what do you want to do next? Or what were you doing before we stopped? If there's been a problem, say a child has, bonked a sibling on the head with something, and we feel that there's a need to fix it, we can then ask simple questions like, what was the big thing that happened? And how are we going to fix it? We don't want to get into lots of whys. We don't want to get into a lot of language, because those things actually, when we're stressed, the part of our brain that is responsible for time and sequence tends to go offline, which is why when we're stressed in these days, so many of us feel disoriented to time. And so asking someone to retell in detail is very hard for them. But if we just say, what's the big thing? Most kids can remember the big thing that happened, and how are we going to fix it? And keep it short, brief, and get them back into life. Now, all these steps can be a lot more details on how we implement them in school and different situations. They might look different, but that's really the broad stroke of what the 4 steps are.
So do you mind just giving like a listing of the 4 steps for us? I know, and we're going to get into the PDF, but just just kind of summarize,
Okay.
so this, okay.
So the 4 steps are: move your body, burn off those stress chemicals, introduce calming chemicals, get settled. Second step is moving from a large gross motor into fine motor and breathing or awareness of senses. Third step is revving up and getting that brain engine, the thinking brain, going again. And fourth step is getting back to what you were doing before, or problem solving if necessary.
Let's talk about some of the troubleshooting aspects of this, or the things that you want to be mindful of not doing. Like, for instance, like with that gross motor piece, would you want to be punching give your kid a pillow and say, get all your aggression out on that pillow?
And you know what? So many of us have heard that time and time and time again, and it's still out there. Here's the problem. If we pair punching something with a feeling of stress in our body, it becomes our go-to response, even if we're directing it to something else. So when we're really upset, we don't have the cognitive energy to redirect it. And plus we're pairing feeling stressed, feeling frustrated, feeling worried, feeling upset with aggression. So we always want to think about activity, not aggression. So when we think about older kids, being able to do things like lifting kettlebells is not an aggressive act. It takes strength, but it's not an aggressive act. So that's a big avoid. The other thing is we don't want to make this process sort of like the adult saying, okay, next we're going to. This is a joining process. This is a relational process. The adult is leading because the student or the child at the time doesn't have the resources right then to do the lead. But the adult's leading and then releasing over time through choice and through that relationship piece. So we don't want to be hyper directive. And then there were the little hints about, we start with the big, not the fine, stress ball. Let me talk about stress balls. So stress balls, some of us might like, but we tend to emphasize the squeeze in and not the release. So the release, again, is the calming part. So if a child has a fiddle object, if they like a stress ball, if they use it, we have to emphasize we squeeze, and maybe squeeze to a count of 3, and we release to a count of 8. So we want to emphasize that.
Dyane, I'm loving all these nuances of commonly held practices that you hear out there. But the reason sometimes they don't work is because there's those nuances, like the squeeze ball. Like I've heard that, but that idea of the release is a key component, is so critical. I appreciate
Right. So, yeah, and so many of them, they make sense on one level. We're feeling tense. It feels like it makes sense. But as we've learned more about neuroscience and how the brain reacts to our body and what it does in reaction, we start realizing, oh, this is just activating. How do we release? How do we calm? So
Dyane, we have a student or a child, my child, that I am noticing is not self-regulating very well. Things are starting to escalate. And I want them to engage in this patterned, some kind of jumping jacks or whatever it might be. We've set up we've set up some choices ahead of time. So I know it's something that they chose before, but now I'm seeing this and it's a direction that they're not willing to engage in. They're not willing to follow. Do you have any suggestions for us on how to deal with that?
absolutely. And one of our goals is to try to catch them early enough in their dysregulation cycle that they are more receptive to that coaching. But if they're not, one of the things we can do is simply, and this is the step we did, is step 0, we can actually allow them to cocoon. Allow them that space and time and say, you know what, I'm gonna give you a couple minutes and just let you feel safe. I'll check back in with you. And when we do that to a child who's expecting us to be upset with them, maybe because of something they've done, it sort of gives them pause and they can just establish that sense of safety for themselves in that cocoon. Some kids will want to go somewhere. Some kids will just want to huddle down. And so if we do that, that might help them. We can come back in and say, you want to try something? I know you chose this, but here are your choices. Again, because choice is a safety thing. So we can give them time and space to feel more safe. And then we come back in again with a very much a coaching and encouraging model of, okay, you ready now? Come on, let's try this. You want to try it? Maybe, and you can even try it yourself and say, I'm going to try this. I think another important part is to always be, particularly now, is to do a lot of think alouds as adults. I'm really starting to feel I'm noticing my hands are tight, or I'm noticing I'm not breathing very well, or I'm noticing I'm snapping at you. I need to do a breath. And we can model parts out. We don't necessarily need to go and do the exercise, but I'm noticing I'm starting to, so maybe I'll just work on my breath for a couple minutes. Or I'm noticing I'm really not doing a very good job. I think I'm gonna do some lunges. I think I'm gonna do a little yoga move, whatever it is. And so we model for kids what they need to see, and it makes it be something that we're doing together, and it's not, you're doing this to please me. This is something that's a tool I use. It's good for me, it's good for you, and we can help each other with it. And what we see when that language becomes a part of either a classroom or a family is kids will sometimes say, I think you might need a step 1 in a moment. They can actually cue us too, because sometimes we're not real regulated.
Yeah, I was thinking that. So you referred to that as step 0, and that's, and you said the word cocoon.
Right.
And is there any reason why you chose the word cocoon? Like, what does that?
Because I think cocoon connotes safety and kind of a closing in with no demands. It's a time to rest, to be ready to change. If we think about when animals cocoon, or when a butterfly cocoons, it is a time of drawing in and quiet, establishing safety before growth. And so when we think about that, sometimes giving that child that couple of minutes. Now, some children will want a blanket. Sometimes they'll want a weighted blanket. Sometimes they'll want their soft toy. They'll want something to help them cocoon, to feel safe. For older kids, it might be that they're pulling themselves up into their sleeves and putting a hood up. They're cocooning. You can actually see kids telling us that they need cocoon.
I noticed that a lot with online schooling. Yeah, I have a 15-year-old, and he always went on to online in his hoodie. It was interesting too, because he doesn't typically wear a hoodie all the time, but that was his way of going online. And then as time went on, he would, the hood would come down and he was engaged. So that's interesting.
It's a safety thing, and we all do it in different ways. As adults, we are probably more likely to cocoon when we become quiet, shut down, look down. We do it more subtly, but we all need that. Now, I don't make it one of the 4 core steps because we don't have to have every child go through cocoon.
Right.
That's more diagnostic when we notice that we can't engage a child, then we would use cocoon.
That is one thing I've learned with my son is when something is pointed out to him, he needs to save face.
Sure.
And he's older, so I need to respect that. And there was a time I didn't quite understand that, and I thought he was just being disrespectful. And now I'm learning that, or I've learned over time, that when I just walk away and remove that demand or that request, in time he will come through. But I had to give that space, or we would be in a constant power struggle.
And one of the things, if you have a child that seems to need cocoon, I would say you want to start paying attention. What are some earlier signs that their stress level's going up, that their dysregulation is going up, so that they don't get to that state if possible. And so start to pay attention. What do I see right before that shutdown? Well, and some kiddos will shut down. And here's I did say, talk about children who withdraw with their dysregulation. The thing you want to do with those students is you want to flip step 1 and 2. So on your PDF, if you want to think about, you want to start with, it's about meeting them where they are. So if I'm shut down, I'm really just at my breath or just in my senses. I might be just looking at my fingers or rubbing, or I might be doing something that's very sensory. Start and meet them where they are in that more shut down, and then go to step 1, get their body more alert, and then do 3, 4. So that's the flip if someone's dysregulation looks like closing in. And sometimes children transitioning from cocoon will want to do a little bit of that and then go into step 1.
And you have referred to the PDF on a couple of occasions. So what I'd like to do right now is take a minute and share the screen so folks can see the PDF.
Great. Okay.
Okay.
Sounds good.
Share my screen. And this is a part that I'm going to make sure I copy and do it the right way. Okay. So Dyane, this is the PDF that you have provided to us. Thank you so much.
Sure
and
enough.
We are going to post this with the recording that we'll provide after our interview when it gets on the PaTTAN website and on our YouTube channel. But would you mind, I will scroll for you, but would you mind just going through the components of the PDF?
All right, so the first part is really the background information about stress, dysregulation, the stressed out brain, and the idea of intervening early. And then we move into the steps. Since we added in our conversation the question about step 0, we'll have that in your PDF, although it's not here right now. So it then goes through the step itself, its main goal, and some examples of things that you can do to meet step 1's expectations. And then it goes through step 2, step 3, and step 4. But you'll notice that I tried to give a little bit of the science. If you come a little bit further down in step 2, you will see that, why is this working? What is the neuroscience behind this step? That these aren't just random things, and they're not put in a random sequence. They're really based on neurology. So you'll see what it does, and then sort of the cues of the important things to know. So things like avoiding that stress ball that I talked about. So each of the steps have those things.
Wonderful. So we have this great PDF, and the video that you alluded to from Sesame Street is listed here with a link. So when folks download the PDF, they'll have access to that.
And there's actually a new one that they did for COVID that, so once you check out that, look for also other ones from Sesame Street. It has a new one that I really like. That talks more about not just feeling angry, but frustrated, lonely, those sorts of emotions. And feeling.
Well, maybe when you update this PDF, you can add that link if you don't mind.
Sounds perfect. Absolutely.
Oh, I love it. So, and then the last thing I want to highlight here is that, as I said in the beginning, you are soon to be a published author.
Yep.
So we provided down below the title of your book And can you just tell us a little bit about this HTTPS?
Okay, this is a link that'll tell you more about the book through Brookes Publishing. And the book itself really goes deeply into reset and all the different forms. It does is it looks at when children are really, really struggling. What are the more intense forms? They still follow the steps, but what should be the things that we say and do to help them move through and eventually become children who can regulate for themselves. So the reset process is about taking kids through a process of regulation, but it's also empowering them to self-regulate for themselves as they move forward in their life.
And when this is posted to our YouTube playlist, if people want to reach out and ask you questions, can they email you directly, or how do you want to handle that?
Absolutely. I will also, as we update the PDF, I will put my email address that people can contact me.
I think there's going to be some questions that folks may want some follow-up or more, how to get in touch with you around their book. So I want to make sure that we make that available to them for moving forward.
And remember, this is just a bite of behavior. See you next time.